Dr. Mark Changizi here with your Science Moment. Today I'm going to talk about the importance of emotional expressiveness in our lives and how it's really central to all the things that we really hold dear. And this is why I think, one reason that I was on the front lines pushing back on face masks, and my Science Moment series has potentially 30 to 50 videos, Science Moments, on issues with face masks and the covering of the face, and they're not any of the typical cardiovascular or face wounds or efficacy kinds of, they're all psychosocietal kinds of consequences. And so I was quite stricken. I am a cognitive science psychologist, but really I'm kind of a physics, math, computer science nerd in background. But even before my most recent book with Dr. Tim Barber on emotional expressions, I have a long history of understanding and researching the origins of our joy and our attachment to different kinds of things coming from emotional expressions on humans. So as a background, there's lots of stimuli out there. There's the natural scenes out there. There's the kind of stimuli that lead to optical illusions, which we talk about, sort of optic flow stimuli. But the stimuli that are most evocative at the end of the day come from other humans. They come from the faces, from the gestures, from the sounds of other humans. It's mostly humans that matter in our lives. As social animals, they're the ones that we need to get along with, we need to mate with, we need to potentially fight with or defend ourselves. These are the dangerous and useful and loving, and all the things that really matter are mostly amongst the other humans. So it's the human stimuli that matter most. So, for example, one of the things that would make life fairly joyless is to lose your ability to see color. Color is a deeply emotional thing to us. It's deeply central to how we think about how we're going to dress, what our color of car should be, our surrounds. It's a deeply emotional thing, and we all have strong opinions about it. And so, an earlier research of mine and the topic of Vision Revolution, my earlier book, Vision Revolution, one of those chapters discusses how color vision is ultimately emotions. It's ultimately about emotions on bare skin. The reason that we primates have color vision is to see emotions on bare skin, blushes, blanches, flushes. All of these kinds of color and health and state modulations on bare skin are only visible because we have a peculiar kind of color vision, something I've talked about in other Science Moment videos. And my Vino Optics company that sells color blindness glasses and vein finder glasses and FreeX sunwear comes out of that discovery. All right, so that's color is so deeply emotional because it's literally about emotions on bare skin. And in fact, it's not just color. Art generally. Art is often its most evocative when it has the stimuli of humans. Sometimes it's just obvious humans, but often in abstract art, there are lines and subtle pieces and subtle parts that are ultimately the kinds of lines that you find on human bodies. Not just the color, but just the shapes of the kinds of musculature, the kinds of lines that happen due to musculature. This is why, for example, horses typically have great lines. They happen to have muscular lines, whereas a typical cow, there are some counterexamples, don't show that musculature, and sometimes humans think that they're less beautiful because they're showing fewer of those kinds of natural lines. We put those kinds of lines and muscle cars and various kinds of cars to give us the kinds of aesthetic looks that we in fact like, which are always human stimuli. So art is filled with subtle human stimuli that we're not aware of. Even the designers are often not consciously aware of it, but they get selected over time to look like human stimuli that and potentially expressive stimuli, like something that's doing something or looking angry, like some kind of lights on the front of a car, which will often look angry and aggressive. They'll do that, and that creates a kind of look. And we just say it looks as it's a look, but we don't often consciously appreciate that. No, it's actually a human look. It's an expressive look, and that's why we like it. So it's just color is about emotions. Arts themselves is often filled with the human stimuli and emotionally expressive stimuli. And that second general topic about art is the topic of my book with Steven Pinker and Brian Boyd and Jeffrey Miller on the origin of art. Now, what's something else that we find really deep and important to life. And I'd say it's even more important than color in the arts. It's music as a special case. And we've talked about this before. Music, too, is human stimuli. Now, you know, people have argued that it's some kind of abstract, complex, mathematical things, and then it has patterns, and then it deviates from these patterns, and it causes. These theories are all unable to predict the kinds of patterns that you find, these regularities, these universals that you can find across music. It cannot explain these kinds of theories, and heartbeat theories, and a lot of these theories are just ridiculously poor and not rich, and can't make any kind of predictions. My theory, in Harnessed, my earlier book, Harnessed, is that music has culturally evolved to sound like a human moving around you evocatively. The beat is that person's gait. Well, the beat is that person's main gait, but any other kind of rhythmicity is due to the other things that are time locked to that gait, which tells you their behavior. They're going up for a layup or they're turning, and then the melody tells you their Doppler shifts. And you can work out the grammar of what humans sound like when they move, and there are particular characterizable patterns or structures or universals that you get with the sounds of humans. And then you can ask, across human music, do we find those patterns? And over, as I show in the book Harnessed, we do. So again, like color, like the arts more generally, the visual arts I was referring to in that case, and music, something we're willing to listen to pretty much at every waking moment, many of us. And the reason we're willing to do that is because ultimately it's a human stimulus of a person evocatively moving around you, even though the person who wrote the music didn't necessarily, and certainly didn't consciously think that, but that's what's driving whether it sounds like a good song or a good music or not, whether it has a good story of an evocative mover. So these three things, they're often the most central, the most enjoyable kinds of things in our lives, and they are ultimately about human stimuli, human emotionally expressive stimuli. Now, they're all kind of beating around the bush because let's just go straight to the source. Where's the source of all these human stimuli? Well, humans themselves, their faces, their gestures, but let's just focus on their faces. And with COVID and these things that people put over their faces and this general attitude that even if they worked, even if there were no cardiovascular or skin tear, skin wound harms, and even if asymptomatics were a serious issue for transmission, and even if the IFR was not low, you are covering over the central manner in which humans communicate with one another, which is ultimately our emotional expressive language. And it's not just the language that we communicate, it's also what brings life to us. It's these interactions. If emotional expressions are so important that they undergird why we love music so much, and why we love color so much, and why we love the arts generally so much, how on earth can people be happy to just say, okay, well, we'll just cover our faces from now on? No, you're covering the source of the joy of life itself when you cover over faces. And this would be part of Expressly Human by Dr. Tim Barber and I, our most recent book, which came out last year. So we've got 4 books of mine, one with Dr. Tim Barber, all of them ultimately about what life is about, what the joys of life are about, whether they're color, art, music, or faces themselves. And ultimately, the common core of all of these is our human expressiveness. Never cover them over, and never let the nerds, in some sense, which are public health officials that claim to be broad-minded people, they're not. They think unidimensionally rather than multidimensionally in understanding what's important in life. And that was your science moment. If you haven't gotten a copy of Expressly Human or any of these other books, go get yourself a copy. If you have read of Expressly Human, we could really use as censored authors. We could really use reviews at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And that was your science moment.